Good evening. My name is Deborah Osterberg, and I'd like to present a workshop on how to search for veterans records for modern military records. That would be World War I to the present. This is a presentation I'm doing on behalf of the San Lorenzo Valley Museum. I used to work at the National Archives at San Francisco, which is actually the facility located in San Bruno, and I would give this presentation every Veterans Day. So I'm very pleased to be able to do that for you tonight. Let's see. Military service records. Well, they were established, remember, for military purposes, not for genealogy, but they do contain a lot of information that benefits genealogists, especially not just for the veteran, but also for the entire family. But first, start with your own family resources. It's always good to check. Get as much information as you can about the individual you might be researching if it's not yourself, and personal diaries, perhaps letters, perhaps a family member had received a medal or ribbons for their service. Maybe you have an old uniform and you can see the insignia on it and find out what branch and what regiment or unit the person may have been with. You might even be lucky to have the discharge papers or pension papers. So, make sure you find out what you have at home that could benefit your search. And there's also some clues on the U.S. Census. I just want to mention a couple of them. 1920, there's not a question specifically about military service on the main census, but check naturalization status, because people could earn their naturalization through military service and still can. So that could be a clue, a possibility. But in 1920, there was also a special overseas military census, because remember, 1920, this is just after World War I, and a lot of people are still overseas, assigned to their units. This is a wonderful one. We'll see a little bit more about it later, but it provides the rank, where the person is stationed. And what's really great about the overseas military census, it provides that serviceman's home address. Now in 1930, there were questions about whether someone was a veteran. It also will list whether they were military or naval forces and what war or expedition they were a part of. So that's very helpful. 1940 census, there's not a question about veteran status on the main census, but when they do a census now, they select about 5% of the people in a particular enumeration district and ask them supplemental questions. And there are questions on veteran status, whether it was war or peacetime service, among those 5% who are asked the supplemental questions. So it may or may not be helpful to you. 1950 census, and it kind of surprised me, it's coming up quick. I don't know if there might be any delay because of the pandemic, but it is scheduled to open to the public in April 2022. So they have to wait a certain period of years until they will open it up to the public. So be on the lookout for that 1950 census coming up shortly. Now, some of you might be familiar with Fold3. That is an online subscription database, or a genealogy database. It has a lot of military service records. That's why they call it Fold3, the fold of the flag. They've got a lot of other material too. You'll find naturalizations on it and city directories and all kinds of things. And it's good for the very early, old military, as we call it, service records. But they don't have service records per se for modern, but they do have a number of different record series that could be beneficial to you. As you can see, 600 million records to date have been added to Fold3. It's a joint project with the National Archives, and you can get a subscription to it. You just go to fold3.com to find out more. But it's supposed to be that after 5 years, anything that was digitized, because these are National Archives records, would be in the public section of the Fold3 database and not the one under subscription. So there are some things already free on Fold3, but there's other things you can view that you have to have the subscription for. But after 5 years, this was part of the agreement with the National Archives. They have to make things public. They do have a section on World War II. As you can see, 140 million records. And it's got some things that are helpful. So it's worthwhile taking a look at it if you're searching for someone from World War II. This is just a small sample. It's not service records, that's something different, but like you see here, Navy cruise books, there's regiment cards here, National Guard even. So take a look through and see what kind of records might be helpful on Fold3 for military. One of them that is a possible help is the Navy and Marine Corps officer registers. Now, this is only officers. And always note how many and what percentage of the records have been digitized. In this case, it's only 57%. So that's why you want to keep checking back. I like Fold3 because they give you that percentage. So you know when new things are being added, and they're being added every day. But in this case, if you have a Navy or Marine Corps officer in your family, check this out, because these registers might give you the service number. And that is helpful for you when you're trying to request the military service record from the National Archives. So that's a possible source for you. Another thing about Fold3, which is nice, is they have a lot of unit histories they've been adding. You know, you're not going to find, you know, stuff about specific people, but if you know what unit, you know, your ancestor was a part of, you can get access to this unit history and see what their unit did during their service, where they went, what kind of actions they were involved in. So it's really quite interesting. I did this kind of thing for my father. He was with the Navy. Now the Navy has this wonderful book that's online you can check, and it has wonderful brief histories of U.S. naval vessels. It's called the Dictionary of American Naval Fighting Ships. And that's very easy to get to. But if you want to get much more in depth about the history of a particular naval vessel, Fold3 has war diaries of naval vessels. Now, these are really nice narratives about the actions and maneuvers that a particular ship was involved in. It's very interesting. I ordered them for my father. As you can see, this is World War II war diaries, and 100% of them are online. That's my dad, Bud, and he was on what they called an auxiliary rescue and salvage ship, the USS Clamp. And I was able to get a copy of his war diary for that ship. And what was amazing is that my dad would tell me all kinds of stories about his time in the South Pacific in World War II. And when I got the war diaries and started reading it, I could recognize the stories he told me, which was amazing. He was so accurate in his memory about things. And what's interesting is that one little piece at the bottom, he went on board. This is, I think, during the Battle of Okinawa, if I recall. Yeah. And he boarded the USS Laffey, which was a destroyer. And it had been hit by 5 suicide kamikazes. And he was a welder, so he had to do welding repair to keep that destroyer afloat. And kind of an amazing part of the story is many, many years later, I had a job working back in South Carolina. My dad was coming out to visit, and I said, well, there's a wonderful naval, museum out here with several ships, and I want you to, we'll visit when you come. And I mentioned the Laffey as one of the ships, and he said, oh, wow, I was on that ship during World War II. And so here was my brother, my dad, and I standing on that ship. It's in the Naval Museum there in South Carolina. Oh, I'm going to have to turn my lights back on. I'll be right back. I didn't know they were timed. Okay. Anyway, we're standing on the deck of this ship, and my dad is pointing out to me the places where he did the welding to keep this ship afloat after it was hit by the kamikazes. So not too many people get to have a chance like that. Now, another thing, there are naval deck logs. Now, these are more, not as narrative as the war diaries. They will give you literally a day by day, almost hour by hour accounting of what the ship did. And when I ordered this, it cost me $50, but it was a huge stack, like about this big, on his ship. And that was just a thrill to get as well. Now you can see that most of the logs are unclassified, though later ones might have some classified information that would be left out. For deck logs for naval ships prior to 1940, you have to write to the old military and civilian records. That's the National Archives facility in downtown Washington, D.C., 700 Pennsylvania Avenue. This is all on the National Archives website as well, if you want to try to take note of it. But that's prior to 1940. There are other naval deck logs. The ones, it's a little confusing, but they have 3 separate places, of course, to find them. Deck logs from 1941 till 1973, you write to what's called the modern military branch. And that's the one in College Park, Maryland, 8601 Adelphi Road. So that's 1941 till 1973. Now, the third category is for deck logs from 1974 to the present. And you have to contact the Naval Historical Center, their ship's history branch, their deck log section. That's the Washington Naval Yard in Washington, D.C. That's 805 Kidder Breeze Street, it says. Now, they did start a program, the Veterans Administration, to scan these deck logs, and they are continuing that. And I'll show you in just a second some of the ones that are where to find the ones that have already been scanned. But unfortunately, as you can see, because they're doing the process, the deck logs from 1956 to 1978 are currently closed to the public because they are currently being scanned and added to the collection. So just something to be aware of. Another reason for checking back. But the ones that have been scanned in that Veterans Administration program so far are available on the National Archives website, which is www.archives.gov. And you could just put in the search box, naval deck logs, and you'd come to the page that would show you this wonderful alphabetical listing of the ships that have been scanned. Their deck logs have been scanned. So a lot of these are from like the 1960s and 70s, I noted. So it gives the name of the ship, and then it has its designation. So like DD, that's a destroyer. I can't remember what all the others are, but so that's a great resource. And you can see, I think there's probably hundreds of them on there now. Switching gears a little bit, talking about merchant marines. That's something special because normally merchant marine wouldn't be considered active military service, but it was in World War II. It was declared that by Congress in 1936 is when the Merchant Marine Act was enacted. And it took, though, until 1988 before those veterans of the merchant service could be given credit for their World War II service. Rather late, but I remember being up at San Bruno, and a lot of veterans from the Merchant Marines would contact us to get their records so they could get military benefits from World War II. Now, it's a little tricky with the Merchant Marines. Oops, did I go too fast? Yay, I think I did. I'm going to switch back because I think I skipped something. Oh, so sorry about that. I wanted to go back, and it had me going back a little bit too far. Okay, let's start again here. Sorry. For the Merchant Marines, they were with the Merchant Marine Service from December 7th, 1941 to August 15th, 1945. They were eligible to get military service benefits and considered, active duty. Now, there's logbooks that can be used to verify their service. And you see the names on the log. Now, the bad part about the Merchant Marines service, if you're a family member, you may not know this information. Of course, the veteran themselves, definitely knew. You'd have to know the name of the ship and the approximate dates of the voyage. You'd also have to know where the voyage started from and where it ended. So it makes it a little tricky if you're a family member trying to track down your Merchant Marine ancestor. But at the National Archives at San Francisco, that's the San Bruno location, we have the merchant vessel records for the Port of San Francisco from 1942 to 1969. So the kind of things you see that you could get, their job title, what wages they made, other information, but privacy restrictions are an issue. So I do recall when these were requested, quite often my fellow coworker who dealt with these had to go through and do a privacy screening and actually do redactions because there's information on other individuals on the page that you might want. So it took a little bit of time to do. But we have most, but not all, of what they were called shipping articles for the merchant vessels. And that's from 1851 all the way to 1950. And they're arranged chronologically by year and then by the name of the vessel. So if you knew somebody who was on a merchant vessel, even from that early period, 100-year period there, if you know the name of the vessel, there's a possibility you might find some information on your family member. Another aspect of the merchant vessels, they were armed guards who were naval personnel assigned to those. These are the Liberty ships, basically. And there are some records you could find that might be helpful. These logbooks, the quality, as it says, really varies. But you can write the National Archives and Records Administration to their Modern Military Records Unit if you know you had an ancestor who served as an armed guard aboard a Liberty ship or merchant vessel of some type. But again, you have to know the name of the ship that they were attached to and the approximate dates of when they were. Now, here's another set of records. Now, we're on the National Archives website again. It's this one that is ADD, that's Access to Archival Databases, add.archives.gov. And there are things like you see here, the World War II Army enlistment records are on here. There's a lot of records on prisoners of war and also for the dead and wounded, like for here you see Korean War and dead and wounded. Same thing probably for Vietnam as well. Naval intelligence personnel. A lot of real interesting, ones that, may not apply to everybody, but, take a look at it. Check out that Access to Archival Databases section of the National Archives webpage, and you might find something that could be of help to you. Another place on the National Archives webpage, which is really helpful, not just for military records, for any kind of records, because this is where it says, well, anyway, let me put it this way, what the National Archives has digitized. And it gives the entire list, and it will tell you whether it's on Fold3 or Ancestry or Family Search or some other, partner link, and tells you, what percentage has been completed. And it's really helpful. It has also the microfilm publication number you can look it up by. So this goes on for pages and pages and pages. So any kind of record that has been digitized by the National Archives or for them, their records by these companies, Fold3, Ancestry, Family Search, you will see a list here. And so it's a very helpful portion of the site to check. But the real heart of things we're going to talk about is the modern military service records at the National Archives. That facility is in St. Louis, Missouri. It's officially called the National Military Personnel Records Center. As you can see, the Pentagon consolidated all their personnel and health records, about 2 million cubic feet worth, that was back in 1950, into this facility, excuse me. And the National Archives became the guardians of this material. But something important to note, the National Archives does not hold state militia or National Guard records. You have to go to the appropriate state archives for that type of service files. We're only talking about national military service with the records in St. Louis. That's the main web page on the National Archives website. When you enter, military service records, you'll probably come right to this. So just be familiar with that look there. Now, two different types of records there. There's the archival and the non-archival. Basically, if it's archival, it's public. If it's non-archival, it's restricted. And you'll have some access, and some people will and some people won't. Just depends. Now, records become archival or public after 62 years after the service member's separation from the military. And as you can see, that's a rolling date. So for 2021, you consider the 62 years, that means everything is open from the very beginning of military service records all the way up to 1959. 1960 and after, they are non-archival, they are still restricted and subject to access policies of the National Archives. So anything before 1959 is open to the public. After, from 1960 after, you would have to be the veteran yourself or next of kin. And we'll go into that a little bit here. They show these charts. This is the archival holdings that are in St. Louis. The Army includes the Army Air Corps and the Army Air Forces. And you can see the end date on all of them is 1959. But the earlier date of the discharges, varies, according to the service. Like for instance, I think the earliest is the Navy back to 1885. And then forward to 1959. So you have Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. There's also a chart on that website that shows you the items that are non-archival. That means they are restricted still, and that is Air Force, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. Those are 1960, as you see, up to the most recent they have listed, 2004 for the Air Force, up to 2002 for the Army, 1994 for the Navy, Marine Corps 1998, Coast Guard is all the way to the present. If you have something you want to look at that's more recent, I think you'd have to go to that particular branch of the military to get the records. And as you see there, the access, we're talking about the veteran themselves or their next of kin. General public is not allowed. Now, there are quite a few records there, 34 million military files. 75% of them are the basic service records, also health records, medical records, discharge, etc. But 25% is medical records, not only of the retirees, but also of their dependents and other persons treated at naval medical facilities. So keep that in mind, that you can also perhaps find medical records of some of the veterans' family members in these files. And these are the people that do the work for you. The staff of the National Military Personnel Center is the largest staff of National Archives employees at one location, 500. As you see there, they respond to more than 2 million requests every year. A huge job. That's the kind of work I used to do, getting up on those ladders, getting those boxes up in San Bruno when I would fulfill requests. Now, accessing these records, now because of the pandemic, there has been a slow up of the service. I read on their site that they're now only at 45% of their usual capacity of their staff. And that's only been since about a month ago. They had an even lower capacity earlier in the pandemic. But because of that, it's going to be an even slower process. The top priority is always the veteran themselves. If they need information for emergency requests, for medical treatments, for burials, for family members needing to get information to have their recently deceased veteran buried, and for homeless veterans. Requests for genealogy purposes were already at the bottom of the priority list, and now they're even further down than they were before. So that's just something to be aware of. They are pretty much just doing routine requests for a DD-214. That's the typical discharge paper, at least for most of the last century. So you hear people talk about a DD-214. I did notice when I was doing research on this that there is a site that comes up quite frequently. There's a private company that if you pay them, they will do the work for you and get the DD-214, but then you have a fee. My understanding always was that there's no fee when you go through the National Archives site in St. Louis when you're requesting things. So it just depends on whether you're willing to pay a company to do it for you or look for it yourself, request it yourself. Now, some of the things you're going to find in these records, enlistments, duty locations, their performance evaluations, awards, training, all of that along with that DD-214. And remember, also medical records like we were just mentioning. But this is some of the processes they go through. And it is a very labor-intensive effort, especially oh, something I'm going to talk about. But you can also find interesting records. I like this one. This is fun because this is Steve McQueen. He was with the Marine Corps for a few years. And I think it's kind of fun because when you look at your ancestors, you know.
I am turning it down, dear.
Yeah, sure. Your veterans records. I love his because you might find what something like on his absent over leave. So obviously he was not the best soldier in the world at the time, but you might find something like that in your own family's records. The ways to request, you can request online with the eVets record system, and that's what I'm going to talk about. The traditional way before the online version was the standard form SF-180. It's called the request pertaining to military records. So people would either mail that in, which you can still do it that way, or fax it in. Probably the most efficient, especially if it's an emergency, would be to use the eVet records system. Now that's what the form SF-180 looks like. It's several pages. They do recommend that people doing genealogy should still use the SF-180 and mail it in, but there's nothing barring you from doing the eVets online system. But that was something they'd mentioned to us at the archives. Oh, another thing you can do with this request, whether you do it online or with the form, is a veteran can replace their military medals and decorations if they had been lost. So that's another thing you can do through this service. Now, the thing that makes especially World War II records very complicated was in 1973, there was a huge fire at that facility in St. Louis. It destroyed anywhere between 16 to 18 million files, but there's no complete list of all the records that were lost. These were the service records, and I will show you which branches were affected and how severely, and what you can do to maybe still find something in this disaster. The records that were destroyed in 1973, with the Army, it was personnel discharged between 1912 and 1960, 80% loss. The Air Force, those discharged between 1947 and 1964, but only certain surnames, as you see there, hovered through to the letter Z. 75% of them were destroyed. Now, you may have in the past sent out a request for, say, World War II records of someone in the Army and been told, well, sorry, no chance, everything's been destroyed. If you did that request before December 7th, 2001, you should try again, because they have a process of restoring and trying to rebuild files. That's a typical file you might find. You might have lost some of the information, but they painstakingly go through this burned material. But the only time they will do that is if there's an active request. So they're not going to do it for everything unless they get a request specifically for that veteran's records. They will go to alternate sources of different types of records series, like morning reports and payroll records and military orders, searching for information about your specific veteran ancestor. Now, as you can see there, which is hard to believe, but they will process up to 3,000 reconstruction inquiries each week. But they will not start them, as I said, unless you submit a request. Now, they also ask people that if you do have records in those time periods of your military veteran, please make a copy of that material and send it back to them. They will accept those photocopies of military service records that you may have copies of that were destroyed in the fire at the Military Records Personnel Center. So it kind of goes both ways. So you can do something to help them reestablish some of this collection. Now, another alternate source they will go to, which you might also go to directly, is the Veterans Administration. If you know your veteran did use medical services with the VA, now these folders, as you can see, are they went to the National Archives if they were retired before the 1990s. Records of routine physical exams, outpatient records, dental records. And it's important down here, if a veteran made a claim prior to July of 1973, the VA may have records, including copies of that discharge form, the DD-214. That's very important to know. So try to find out the most you can. These dates, are important to pay attention to, and think about where you can find these alternate records. Now, the eVets system itself, the more you know, the better it is. The more you can fill in on that this online form, the better. Veteran's complete name and the name they used in service, and that's important. At the house, his grandfather or his uncle, that he decided to use his middle name. So from 3rd grade all the way through high school, my father was Errol Herman. When he went to enlist in the US Navy, they said, were you ever officially adopted? And he said, no. And they said, guess what? You're going back to your original name. So instead of being Errol Herman, he was suddenly William Osterberg again. So you really got to watch it with those names. Hopefully, and ideally, and not everybody will have it, but that service number, if you have it, put it in the request. The social security number, put that in the request. The branch of service, the date of service, their date and place of birth is also helpful. But the most important thing, if you want to get more than just a simple discharge form, that DD-214, you must put in the comments section that you want all the records in the service file. Otherwise, you're only going to get that one little sheet of paper probably. So if you want everything, you must put that in the comments section of the request. That's really key. And that's easy to miss when you're reading through the instructions. Now, if the request that you're putting in was affected, those records, by that 1973 fire, the more information you can put in, the better. If you know where they were discharged, the last unit they were assigned to, and the place that they entered into the service. I know those are trickier, but those additional pieces of information are going to make it even more helpful for the staff to find alternate sources for your veteran whose file was destroyed in that 1973 fire. Now, next of kin, for those files after 1960, they're still considered restricted and they're non-archival. They consider the next of kin an unremarried widow or widower, son or daughter, father or mother, brother or sister. They do want you to provide proof of the death of the veteran, a death certificate, letter from funeral home, or a published obituary. So you will need that, even though you are listed as next of kin. So that's very important to know if you want to get any of those military service records after 1960. Now, sometimes third parties want to get records, like whatever reasons, lawyers, doctors, historians. Well, they have to get a special authorization signed by the veteran or the next of kin before they can request these records. But that is good for a year after they're signed off. So that's something you can do if you need to provide a professional like that with a veteran's service record. This is what the first screen looks like for the eVets search. I'm not putting up all the pages, just, it's just a series of questions. Fill in as much information as you know. And don't forget, in that comment section, put that you want all the records. Now, this is interesting. I don't know why. Now it's 20 days that you have to send in a printed out signature verification form, have it signed and dated, and mail it to them. Even though you're doing the online submission, you still have to print out, sign and date the signature verification, or they will ignore your online search. You must mail in that signature verification, and it has to be sent in within 20 days. Now that's interesting to me because years ago when I was doing this, it used to be within 72 hours you had to submit it. And I'm wondering if the 20 days now might be because of the pandemic. I'm not sure if that's going to remain their rule. but that's much easier, much nicer to have that extra time. But just remember, you fill out everything on the eVets, online search form, you send it off. If you don't send in that paper, they're going to ignore it. Another thing that can be done, the veterans themselves may want to make some corrections to their military service record, and that's possible. Minor corrections can be made. Misspelled name, the wrong birth date, social security number in wrong. So that's something that you could put in the comments if there are errors that you like to get corrected. That can be done. And what's really nice is that they do have a page where you can check on the status of your request. And even if you don't remember what your request number is. So this is really nice. So you can keep up saying, well, yeah, how much longer is it? Or, making sure that they receive their request and that everything is, in their system. So that's a really important page to be aware of. This really kind of comes to the conclusion of what I was going to talk about tonight. A nice evening and a happy Veterans Day.